This is the story of how Britain's capital became unaffordable for ordinary people. Average rents in London now stand at £2,265 per month, which is nearly double what renters pay across the rest of the country. A typical house costs £545,000, and that means scraping together a deposit of £125,000 before you can even think about buying, which would take most first-time buyers more than 30 years of saving. And here is the number that tells you everything. 129,000 people packed up and left London for other parts of the UK in 2023 alone. Over the next 10 minutes, we are going to look at exactly how this happened, from the inflation crisis to the housing shortage to wage stagnation, and the forces that have completely reshaped who can actually afford to live in this city. The housing crisis. Housing is where the numbers become genuinely alarming. 11.1 times average earnings. That is London's current housing affordability ratio, meaning the typical home costs more than 11 years' salary. A ratio of 5 times earnings is generally considered the threshold where housing remains affordable, and according to Schroeder's analysis, London has not seen affordability this poor in 150 years. Renters face numbers that are just as grim. Average advertised rents across Greater London hit £2,661 per month in early 2024, according to Rightmove. In Kensington and Chelsea, that figure climbs to £3,616 per month, the highest anywhere in the United Kingdom. Even Bexley, which is London's cheapest borough, averages £1,485 per month, and that is still above what people pay on average across the rest of the country. Rental inflation peaked somewhere between 14 and 15% annually during 2022 and 2023 before cooling to around 4.3%. But here is the thing. That slowdown happened mainly because tenants simply ran out of money. Research from the Resolution Foundation found that average rents now sit more than £200 above what would be considered affordable levels. And what about buying instead of renting? The arithmetic there is brutal in a different way. London's average deposit has ballooned to £124,688, which is 104% higher than the UK average of £61,090. A buyer putting aside 10% of their take-home pay would need 31 years to save that amount, and that figure stood at just 15 years back in 2003, so it has doubled in 2 decades. What this has created is essentially a 2-tier system, where 37% of first-time buyers now depend on family gifts or loans to purchase property, up from 27% the previous year. Owning a home increasingly comes down to whether your parents have money rather than whether you've earned it yourself. For people who can't count on family help and can't swing private renting, the social housing safety net has mostly fallen apart. April 2024 saw London's waiting list hit 336,366 households, a 10-year high that represents 25% of England's entire social housing wait list, even though London holds just 16% of the population. 3-bedroom properties come with average waits of 4 to 6 years, and family homes require over 6 years. The most alarming figure is this: 183,000 Londoners currently live in temporary accommodation. That works out to 1 in every 50 residents, and roughly 90,000 of them are children, about 1 homeless child per London classroom. The inflation shock. Understanding how things got this bad requires looking at what unfolded between 2022 and 2024, which was the most severe inflationary shock Britain had experienced in 4 decades. October 2022 saw UK inflation peak at 11.1%, the highest reading in 41 years, and that was followed by 7 consecutive months of double-digit inflation stretching from September 2022 through March 2023. Living standards collapsed at the fastest pace anyone had seen in generations. Energy costs delivered the first blow. The Afghan price cap jumped from 1,000 to £277 in winter 2021 to 2022 to a projected £3,549 by October 2022, a 178% increase that forced the government to step in and cap bills at £2,500. Current caps sit at £1,755 as of late 2025, but that still leaves households paying 43 to 45% more than they did before the crisis began. The average household spent an extra £800 on gas during just the first year of the Ukraine war. Food prices spiked even harder. March 2023 brought food inflation of 19.2%, the highest in over 45 years, and between January 2022 and January 2024, food prices rose by 25% cumulatively. To grasp how unusual that is, consider that food prices rose just 9% total during the entire decade before that. Certain categories saw extreme jumps, with chocolate up 43% since 2022, and olive oil climbing 114% between 2019 and 2024. The pain was not spread evenly either, as 61% of residents in deprived neighborhoods reported buying less food, compared to 44% in wealthier neighborhoods. Food costs hit some households much harder than others. Transport and local taxes piled on additional pressure. Transport for London fares went up 5.9% in March 2023, and tube fares rose another 4.6% in 2025. Council tax at Band D in London climbed from £1,684 to £1,982 between 2022 and 2025, a 17.7% increase, while Thames water bills jumped approximately 50% over that same period. Taxes and fares added another layer of strain. Families with young children faced even steeper costs. Inner London childcare for children under 2 now runs £1,855 per month, 33% above the UK average. And that single expense consumes 74% of average take-home pay for London families. Numbers like these help explain why only 16% of London first-time buyers have dependents. Childcare is a decisive factor in whether families can stay in the city. Wages fell as costs rose. Here is where the mathematics turned particularly cruel. While all these costs kept rising, real wages were actually falling. 20 consecutive months. That is how long inflation outpaced wage growth between November 2021 and June 2023. When the gap hit its widest point in October 2022, inflation ran at 11.1% against wage growth of roughly 6%, which meant a real terms pay cut exceeding 5% in a single year. The Resolution Foundation calculated that typical household incomes dropped 7% over 2 years, representing approximately £2,100 less for the average family. Londoners do earn more than people elsewhere in the country, with the median salary reaching £47,455 in 2024, which is 26.8% above the UK average of £37,430. But here is the thing. That premium has been almost entirely swallowed up by higher housing costs. Despite earning £10,000 more annually than the typical UK worker, Londoners actually face worse affordability because rent consumes 44% of take-home pay in London compared to 36% nationally. Homeowners with mortgages took hits from another direction when the Bank of England started raising interest rates. Rates climbed from 0.25% in December 2021 to a peak of 5.25% by August 2023, the highest since 2008, through 14 consecutive increases. What that meant in practice was that monthly payments on a £100,000 mortgage jumped from £363 to £563, a 55% increase. For owners of the average London semi-detached home, mortgage payments rose from £781 to £1,262 per month between December 2021 and December 2022, which works out to a 61% increase in just 12 months. London mortgage holders faced average payment increases of £8,000 between 2022 and 2024. According to the Resolution Foundation, more than double the £3,400 increase seen in Wales. Mortgage arrears rose 48% between the third quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2024, and repossessions shot up by 237%. And this gets worse. By April 2025, real median pay remained 2% below 2008 levels, meaning workers still have not recovered ground lost in the financial crisis, let alone made up for the recent inflation shock. Population pressures and the London paradox. London's population dynamics reveal something of a contradiction, where the city gains international migrants while simultaneously losing domestic residents. Net migration to the UK peaked at 944,000 in early 2023, an all-time record, and London's share of that reached 154,000 in net international migration during 2023. But at the same time, 129,000 residents left the city for other UK regions through domestic migration. High immigration during this period had specific and largely time-limited causes. Care worker visas surged from 4,100 to 18,300 per month. By August 2023, after the sector was added to shortage lists, while student visas together with dependent routes brought substantial numbers, and Ukrainian and Hong Kong humanitarian schemes added further inflows. Policy changes in 2024 have already shifted this picture dramatically, with student dependence banned, care worker recruitment restricted, and the skilled worker salary threshold raised from £26,200 to £38,700. Net migration has already dropped by half from its peak, falling to 431,000 by 2024. NHS pressures, often pointed to as evidence of population strain, actually show mixed signals. Waiting lists peaked at 7.7 million in September 2023 and sat at 7.4 million by August 2025. A&E performance hit a record low, with only 50.4% seen within 4 hours in December 2022, before improving to 74.2% by late 2025, though still below the 78% target. That said, workforce growth has been substantial, with doctor numbers up 22% and nurses up 23% over 5 years. School places tell a story that runs counter to simple population pressure narratives, with London places actually forecast to drop by 7,904 between 2023 and 2028, due to a 17 to 20% decline in London birth rates since 2012. The real driver of the housing crisis sits in decades of undersupply. Research from the Institute for Fiscal Studies found that over 25 years, London's adult population grew 29%, while homes grew only 23%. That structural gap, not recent immigration, explains most of what's happening. The exodus. Given everything covered so far, the fact that Londoners are leaving in large numbers should not come as a surprise. 186,000 people. That is how many left London through domestic migration from 2020 to 2021, the peak of the COVID exodus. Annual outflows have since stabilized to around 129,000, but that remains historically elevated, and only 20% of Londoners now intend to stay in the city for life, down from 27% before the pandemic. Destinations cluster in the commuter belt and regional cities. Brentwood in Essex saw Londoners buy 47% of homes sold there in 2024, up from 23% in 2019, while Surrey, Hertfordshire, Kent, and Buckinghamshire absorb much of the rest. Others head to Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, and Bristol, seeking urban amenities at lower costs. And a record 31% of those buying outside London in 2024 were first-time buyers, moving an average of 25.5 miles away. Economic reasons dominate the explanations people give. Living costs in Manchester run 40% below London's, and Birmingham sits 45% lower. The salary needed for what researchers call a livable lifestyle comes to £38,000 in London versus £26,000 in Manchester or £25,000 in Birmingham. A professional earning £45,000 who works 3 days a week in London while living in Manchester could save approximately £12,000 annually. Remote work made this shift possible. Around 42% of UK professionals now work remotely at least part-time, and during the pandemic, 1.6 million Londoners, 26% of the working population, worked outside the capital and wanted to keep doing so. Young workers have particularly embraced this flexibility, with 31% saying remote work is what allows them to save money by relocating. Quality of life rankings reinforce why leaving makes sense. The Economist Intelligence Unit's 2024 Livability Index ranked London 45th globally, behind Manchester at 43rd, while Mercer's 2024 Cost of Living Survey showed London jumping 9 places to become the world's 8th most expensive city, trailing only Hong Kong, Singapore, several Swiss cities, and New York. What does all this mean for people actually trying to live in London? The cumulative impact has changed daily life in ways that show up immediately in household budgets. A single person in London now faces monthly costs running between £2,700 and £3,200 for basics alone. That covers rent, energy, council tax, transport, and food before any discretionary spending happens. A family of 4 with 1 child in childcare faces monthly costs between £5,300 and £7,000 or more, representing roughly £400 to £500 more per month in 2024 to 2025, compared to what they paid in 2022. Demographics are shifting as a result. First-time buyers in London now average 34.8 years old, and 65% buy alone rather than as couples. Material deprivation rose by 3 million people nationally between 2019 and 2023. The share of people unable to adequately heat their homes tripled, from 4% to 11%. And food insecurity climbed from 7% to 10% of households. What the data reveals isn't just rising costs, but a structural shift. 31 years to save for a deposit. 44% of income goes to rent. 183,000 people are in temporary accommodation. These figures represent failures that built up over decades rather than years, and the inflation shock from 2022 to 2024 accelerated existing trends rather than creating them. Food prices rose 25% in 2 years, compared to net 9% in the preceding decade, and interest rate increases added £8,000 a year to London mortgage payments. London remains the United Kingdom's economic engine, generating 33.2% higher productivity than the national average, and its population continues growing through international migration even as domestic residents leave. But the question at the center of this video, whether living in London has become impossible, has a clear answer for growing numbers of people. When the salary premium no longer covers the cost premium, when first-time buyers increasingly need family wealth to get started, when nearly half of young adults plan to leave within a decade, what we are seeing isn't a temporary adjustment. London is being reshaped into a city that only certain people can afford, and the numbers suggest that process is already well underway.